Good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me to join you. And this morning, to kick things off, I am going to share with you 7 actions that evidence-based practice professionals can take to help us have courageous leadership at a time when we most need it, during this age of anxiety. But a couple comments first. Kirsten mentioned proceed until apprehended, which is a work in progress. You have in your resource page for this conference a 60-page preview we prepared for last week's AONL conference. And 2 of the values covered in this book are courage and leadership. And the book is dedicated to 2 people who truly represent courageous leadership. I'm not talking about the physical leadership of the battlefield. I'm talking about the moral leadership that we need today. And those 2 people are Mark and Bonnie Barnes. They turned the grief that they felt after the death of their son, Patrick, into a gift for caregivers everywhere for the profession of nursing. And today, more than 5,000 hospitals around the world are DAISY hospitals. More than 2 million nurses have been nominated for DAISY awards. And any nurse who has earned a DAISY award will look at that as being one of the highlights of a career. That is the kind of courageous leadership that we need today. The selflessness, the commitment to service, the commitment to other people, the commitment to our profession and to the patients we serve. My friend Stephen Pressfield is an author. He wrote a book, a fictional story of Alexander the Great. And he had Alexander say this: "Nothing so steadies a company confronting great odds as a sober recitation of the facts. The more dread-inducing the reality, the more directly it must be faced." In other words, evidence-based practice can promote courageous leadership. In other words, we need you now more than ever. And I want to share with you in one picture why year after year after year, nursing is the most trusted profession. And that is this picture. This is the display that social performance Suzanne Furstenberg mounted in the Capitol Mall last September. In fact, there's an article about it this morning in the New York Times with a beautiful video you should watch. By the way, that's Suzanne. Every one of those flags represents somebody who's died of COVID. At the time she planted all those flags, we were at 700,000. And of course, today we're almost at 1 million, if not already there. And every one of those flags has one thing in common. Each and every one, no matter where they live, no matter what their politics were, red state, blue state, no matter what their income was, driving a Ferrari or coming to the hospital on Medicaid, no matter what their attitude was about vaccination, whether they were vaccinated or not, every single one of them, almost without exception, was cared for by a nurse. When they died, the chances are that they were being comforted by a nurse. Perhaps their hand was being held by a nurse. And after they died, their family was comforted by a nurse. And those nurses shared one thing in common. It did not matter what their politics were, red state, blue state. It did not matter what kind of car they drove. It did not matter what their religious practice or belief or non-belief was. It did not matter what their attitude was about vaccination, what their attitude was about whether or not the person they were caring for had been vaccinated. They gave every single patient the very best care they could with the resources they had. And too many of them, nurses, physicians, other caregivers, paid with their lives for the caring that they gave. And this is why I think nursing has a lock on most trusted profession for the rest of the century, because of that commitment to the patient. And, we've been hearing a lot about the light at the end of the tunnel. And people talk about it as if it's some sort of a marathon finish line. Oh, we're going to run across the line. And that's not true. The light at the end of the tunnel is a flickering torch. And it's a torch that some of us will reach sooner than others. And our obligation is to pick up that torch and illuminate the way for people who are still behind us in the tunnel. And there are going to be a lot of them. dragging along, and to light the way into the tunnels in front of us, because we know this is not the last tunnel we're going to go through. And it is our obligation as healthcare professionals, as EBP professionals, to help light the way into the future. And I want to tell you, we've been here before. Here's a lesson from history. My definition of a rock star is somebody who can go by one name. Ali, Madonna, Oprah. They don't need two names. And in healthcare, there's only one, Florence. And when Florence came into the Scutari Barrack Hospital in 1854, it was the healthcare crisis. She wrote home to a friend and said, surely this place is the kingdom of hell. The conditions were absolutely squalid. This is a wood carving made by somebody who was there at the time. Medical care, when it was available at all, was abysmal. Infection was rampant. The Scutari Barrack Hospital had been built over a cesspool. Basic supplies. One of the first things Florence had to do was go into town and buy spoons so that sick and dying soldiers could eat soup. Basic supplies were lacking. Mortality exceeded 50%. More than half of these poor blokes who had taken a bullet for their queen died in this place. And in a 2-year period, Florence, the lady with the lamp, established nursing as a true profession, defined what it means to be a nurse, and we honor the lady with the lamp for that. What we tend not to recognize is that during those same 2 years, Florence also created a blueprint for the hospital as we know it today. She invented the modern hospital. She was the first one ever to establish housekeeping as an organized process. Literally every department in your hospital, with the exception of high-tech stuff that didn't exist back then, can trace its roots back to Florence. She didn't understand, nobody really understood the causes of infection, but in establishing the first housekeeping and the first laundry services, she established infection control processes that we still use to this day. We talk about supply chain as if it's something new. Florence called it procurement, but she spent a lot of time worrying about supply chain. And notice the red circle. They didn't, and again, this is a print from the time. They didn't call it the British Army Hospital. They called it the Nightingale Hospital at Scutari. She was the first one to really understand the importance of food and nutrition. She hired a famous chef, brought him down to Scutari, built a kitchen for him. And take a look at this picture. Take a look at the body language. Who do you think is the boss in this conversation that's going on there? She was the first one to understand the importance of physical environment for healing. Compare this picture with the first one I showed, the squalid conditions. The soldiers have been elevated onto wooden floors to keep them warm. The windows are open. There's even artwork on the walls. And again, who is in command in this picture as some officer pleads with her for something? She was the first person ever to keep careful medical records on every patient. She established fundamental principles of triage that should at least guide us right down to today, that your triage would be based on your clinical condition, not your rank in the military, not your social status. In Victorian England, this was radical. This was revolutionary. The doctors fought her, the military brass fought her. She stood her ground, and she established a core principle of humanity for healthcare. We talk about patient rounding as if focused rounding is something new. The lady with the lamp made rounds every night. It was said that as she walked by, she couldn't see every one of the thousands of sick and dying soldiers there, but it was said that these men would kiss her shadow as she walked by. We talk about patient experience like that's something that Jason Wolfe invented. He's done a lot for it, but the first person ever to take it seriously was Florence. She established a patient chapel, a patient library. And I do not know what she's pouring into that shot glass, but I'll bet you anything it had to do with giving some poor wretch a better experience at the Scutari Barrack Hospital. She was, in a very real sense, the first hospital administrator. And I'm a recovering hospital administrator, but we healthcare administrators owe her the same debt that nursing owes. We just don't recognize it the way nursing does. Queen Victoria, as she was bemoaning the incompetence of her military commanders in the Crimean War, said, "I wish I had Florence at the War Office." Mark Bostridge, in his wonderful biography, said, within that 2-year period, by the end of the war, she had transformed that kingdom of hell into an efficient and smooth-running operation. After the war, Florence pretty much disappeared from public view, but her work was just beginning. She did one of the first healthcare epidemiological studies to try to understand, why did mortality rates drop from 50% to 2% during that 2-year period. She wrote 2 of the most influential books in the history of healthcare, Notes on Nursing, Notes on Hospital. Her principles of healthcare design, of what a hospital should look like, guided hospital construction for the next 100 years, including the University of Iowa hospitals and clinics. The main central hospital has the pavilion concepts that Florence Nightingale pioneered. She was, of course, the guiding light for the first professional school of nursing, and she devoted her last 50 years to fighting for the health care of soldiers and veterans in the British Army. And when she died, her coffin was escorted by octogenarian veterans of that war who still, they couldn't remember the names of the incompetent commanders who led them to the slaughter, but they still remembered, they still remembered the lady with the lamp who cared so much for them. Ryan Holiday, the Stoic philosopher, just came out with a new book called Courage is Calling. And one of the courageous leaders he writes about is Florence. And he said, do you even want to think about a world where Florence did not revolutionize nursing? And again, Bostridge in his biography said, you don't have to look very far to see that the things that concern Florence are still our concerns today. And you know, if Florence came back and could see what's going on today, she said, oh yeah, I've seen all this before. People don't want to wear masks. Yep, back in my day, they didn't want to wash their hands. People think vaccines are poisonous. Oh yeah, back in my day, they didn't want to do anesthesia because they thought it was poison. The problems remain the same, and we can learn so much from the solutions. Florence's countryman, Winston Churchill, said, it's a shame to waste a good crisis. I imagine he'd say the same thing about a bad crisis. And so the question is, what are the lessons that we can learn from history, from Florence's experience? And I want to share with you 7 courageous things that we need you as evidence-based professionals to help us deal with the challenges that we're facing today. And number 1, courageous action number 1, help us defend truth, objective truth, against FEAR. You may have heard the acronym FEAR is fantasized evidence appearing real. And many of the problems we're dealing with today are caused by manufactured fantasized evidence. I spent 10 years fighting the white-collar drug pushers of the tobacco industry. Nobody has ever done a better job of fabricating evidence to promote, in their case, a business cause. In my work, I had a 2-hour interview with this man, James Bowling. At the time, he was the senior vice president for Philip Morris, the makers of Marlboro. If you saw the classic anti-smoking documentary about Marlboro men who were dying of lung cancer called Death in the West, he was the arch villain represented there. This man was brilliant when it comes to misinformation. This man knew the science inside and out, and he was able to twist it to make any argument he wanted to make to support smoking. For example, he told me that the Framingham Heart Study found that heavy smokers had half the risk of dying of heart disease as moderate smokers. He said, what's that tell you, Joe? You ought to smoke a lot to protect yourself from heart disease? What he told me was factually accurate. That was a true statement. What he didn't tell me is what made it a lie. The reason heavy smokers had a lower rate of heart disease death is because so many of them died of lung cancer before they got old enough for their hearts to give out on them. And this sort of technique, taking something that is factually correct and twisting it into a lie, we've been seeing it with anti-masking, anti-vaccination, promoting things like ivermectin. And we have an obligation to confront misinformation disinformation, and we have an obligation to more aggressively and effectively tell people the truth. Unfortunately, that disinformation is working. Kaiser Family Foundation survey found that among unvaccinated people, more of them think that getting the vaccine is a bigger risk to their health and their life than getting COVID. I was at AONL last week, talked to a lot of nurse leaders, and I asked many of them, have you had anybody in your hospital die because of a complication of the COVID vaccine? Nobody had. And of course, every single one of them had their nurses zip up far more than their share of body bags from people who had died of COVID. And many people, study after study shows a significant differential between vaccinated and not vaccinated death rates, hospitalization rates, and the human cost of this militant ignorance has been fueled by belligerent disinformation. And healthcare leaders have been running ads like this. This is a fairly recent ad that the 9 major health systems in Minneapolis signed by each of their CEOs. We're heartbroken. We're overwhelmed. Please get a vaccine. Please take the pressure off our staff. I applaud that. I think, and many other organizations have done that, but I also think it's too little too late. What if at the very outset, we had confronted the misinformation? What if when people said, oh, it's a hoax, we'd said, no, it's not a hoax? I mean, leadership at the very top of our healthcare organizations, our healthcare associations had said, no, it's not a hoax. And when people started saying, vaccines will kill you, no, that's a lie. No, that's not true. What if we hadn't left it to social media? What if right away we had taken the initiative to tell people the truth and to confront the people who are misinforming them about the risks? Now, on COVID, the genie's perhaps already out of the bottle, but it's going to happen again. There'll be another pandemic. There'll be another healthcare crisis of some sort. What can you, as evidence-based practice professionals, do to help equip senior leaders at healthcare organizations, health systems, healthcare associations, and prompt them to more quickly, more effectively, more aggressively counter this health disinformation and do it sooner? What if we had in the AHA, the ANA, what if we had an EBP professional whose job was to monitor the environment and to see what are the risks that are coming upon us and what kind of information do we have to claim the high ground before social media can start misinforming people? Courageous action number 2. Help us prepare to take care of what we call COVID's emotional long haulers. One of the resources that you have on my resource page for this conference is an article I wrote with several California nurse leaders called Caring for COVID's Emotional Long Haulers. And we use the metaphor of Halley's Comet. Once every 76 years, it blazes across the sky and it pulls a long tail behind it. And that's what COVID's going to do. Long after the disease has become endemic, we are going to continue to have people who are struggling with mental health, with emotional challenges, with moral injuries. How do we prepare for this ongoing epidemic? AACN, the Critical Care Nurses Group, has a new website called Hear Us Out. Can you imagine this a couple years ago before COVID? Can you imagine having to set up a website telling people that our healthcare system is at risk because our nurses and other caregivers have been pushed to the edge? And they have surveys reported on this. They've surveyed more than 6,500 critical care nurses. 9 out of 10 believe the pandemic has depleted nurses and will cut their career short. 66% consider leaving nursing, and we're starting to see that exodus. And 3 out of 4 believe that patients who chose to not be vaccinated are undermining nurses' well-being. We do a culture assessment survey, and we had one variation of it that many of you completed. We'll put the results of that in our resource page. One of the things that we're seeing that we would not have seen 2 or 3 years ago is a level of anger at the unvaccinated by nurses who are being asked to work extra shifts, being asked to put their own families at risk, being asked to put their own lives on hold as they come in to care for COVID patients. We never saw that with caring for lung cancer patients because they smoked, or head injury patients because they didn't wear a helmet. And this is something that I think is very concerning and that needs to be watched very closely. How do we manage this incipient anger? AONL, the American Organization for Nursing Leadership, has been doing a 3-part ongoing longitudinal study. And one of the questions they asked nurse leaders is, what are your biggest challenges? In July of 2020, about half said it was the mental health and emotional well-being of their staff. August 2021, that had increased to 75%, making it the number one concern, ahead of staffing, ahead of retention. And I'm pretty sure that if you were to do the same survey today, it might even be higher than 75%. And in our article, Kim Long, Nancy Blake, my other colleagues, and I talk about these 3 things where we often hear these terms used almost interchangeably: burnout, PTSD, moral injury. They are very different things. Burnout is the chronic exhaustion and cynicism that builds up over a long period of time. PTSD is a response to having been involved in or having witnessed one or more traumatic events. And it's something that can hide for a long time. Its onset can be insidious, it can be gradual, it can be devastating. And moral injury is having to take an action or make a decision where you can honor one value or another, but not both. Any nurse who has to care for too many patients and not be able to give each patient the care that nurse was trained to give is going to experience a moral conflict, moral distress. Any manager who has to look a nurse in the eye and say, I know you're exhausted, I know you need more time with your family, but I need you here again tomorrow, is experiencing that sort of moral distress. Those are different things. And as you know, wrong diagnosis leads to the wrong treatment. And how do we, as evidence-based practice professionals, make our organizations do a better job of caring for these things? Now, this is one of the questions in the survey that I asked you guys to fill out. And as of the last check, we had 66 people. One of the questions, do you think your staff believe that your organization is doing enough for their mental and emotional well-being? And look at this, more than half of you think not at all. And almost nobody thinks absolutely yes. And this echoes every time we've done the survey with hospitals and healthcare associations across the country. Nobody thinks that we're doing enough. So the question is, what can we learn from this guy's experience? What can we learn from returning combat veterans about dealing with PTSD, something that nobody's really figured out completely? What can we learn about how to help people cope with burnout, with moral distress, moral injury? What is the evidence? Courageous action number 3. Help us assess the evidence for things that are non-quantifiable. We have a validated culture assessment survey called VCI 17 because there are 17 questions in it. And there's one question that, to my mind, matters more than all the other questions put together. It says, our culture does not tolerate bullying, toxic negativity, or disrespectful behavior on a 5-point scale. Now, these are results from the same year from 2 hospitals that compete in the same metropolitan area. They compete for the same patients, the same providers, the same staff, the same donors, the same media attention. In one hospital, hospital number 1, 8 out of 10 people said yes. They agreed and almost half strongly agreed, we don't tolerate that kind of behavior. Hospital number 2, 7 out of 10 did not agree with that statement, and less than 10% strongly agreed. So tell me, which hospital has higher patient satisfaction, 1 or 2? And you know the answer, it's 1. Which hospital has greater employee loyalty? You know it's 1. Which one has higher nursing turnover? You know there, it's number 2. Which one has healthier financials? Number 1. Which one has had the most bad press? It's two. I could also ask you which one year after year shows up on best places to work rosters, including Fortune magazine. And of course, it's one. This one question predicts almost every other outcome. And we see this fairly consistently every time we do the survey. In fact, I told hospital number 2, I told the CEO I was going to do a billboard for him. He asked me to hold off on that and let them work on their invisible architecture of values and culture and attitude before we actually did the billboard. People talk about culture and values and attitude as if it's soft stuff. It is not soft stuff. It predicts almost everything else. And this is why so many patient satisfaction programs end up being program of the month, why the happy face pin is upside down 3 months later, because you're not addressing the fundamental underlying problem of how our people treat each other and the values they bring to work, the attitudes that are reflected in their work. And I keep hearing, I'm sure that you agree with me on this, I keep hearing, people are survey fatigued. There is no such thing as survey fatigue. A survey is a way of getting evidence. And anyone who says, oh, there's too much survey fatigue, misunderstands what they're talking about. People are not fatigued by taking surveys. People love to take surveys if they believe that somebody's going to read the survey, if they believe somebody's going to actually do something about it. What causes survey fatigue is being asked to complete a survey and knowing that nobody's going to do anything about it. And we need to create the evidence. We need to ask our people more, not less. What do you think? What are your perceptions? What can we do better? By the way, the survey that I asked you to complete, we had probably more than 200 open comments, very, very thoughtful comments. There's no survey fatigue if people think you're actually going to read it. So how can you, as EBP professionals, help us apply your discipline to assessing things that are really not quantifiable, like how well we live our values? I did one survey. I wrote an article for Nurse Leader a couple of years ago on how hospitals live their values. And I did a survey, had quite a few healthcare professionals respond. Only 2 out of 10 strongly agreed that senior leaders in their hospitals reflected the values that were posted on the wall. How can you help us apply your discipline to monitor and assess and do a better job of practicing our values, of honoring our culture, of living with effective and admirable attitudes at work? And by the way, if anyone tells you that you can't really change culture, show them this picture. If you're old enough to remember when everywhere, hospitals, airplanes, everywhere, and you could not get away from it. You couldn't protect your child from it. And today, worldwide, we virtually have a smoke-free world. That is maybe one of the most profound culture shifts in the history of the world. What happened? How did we make that change? How do we learn from what the movement to eradicate public smoking, to eradicate TV ads promoting the Marlboro Man and the Virginia Slims lady? How can we learn from that and apply those lessons to the challenges that we face today? Courageous action number 4. Help us move from a culture focused on accountability to a culture focused on ownership, to a culture of ownership. This has never been more important than it is today over the last couple of years. Think about it. Accountability is doing what you're told to do because there are consequences. It's motivation imposed by extrinsic reward and, for the most part, punishment. People don't often think of being held accountable as a positive thing. It is the accountability of the drill sergeant, of boss over subordinate, parent over child, the chain of command top down. And think of the metaphors we use. I'm going to crack the whip. I'm going to hold your feet to the fire. The metaphors we use for hierarchical accountability are forms of torture used during the Dark Ages. And the truth is, especially in healthcare, you cannot hold people accountable for the things that really matter. How do you crack the whip to make somebody more compassionate? How do you hold somebody accountable for pride, for empathy? You really can't. Nobody ever won a Daisy Award by doing what they were accountable for. I know that for a fact. When I was a patient at University of Iowa hospitals and clinics with acute diverticulitis, I completed 4 Daisy nominations, and my nurse, Shelley, won one of those nominations. And in my nomination form, I specifically said, I'm nominating Shelley for things that she didn't learn in nursing school, that aren't in her job description, that she cannot be held accountable for. And Mark and Bonnie will have told me that that's probably the case with almost every Daisy nomination. They're not things you can be held accountable for. And so let's look at what you can and cannot hold people accountable for. You can hold people accountable for complying with your rules, but not for living your values. Make them show up on time, but not be emotionally present. You can hold them accountable for discipline, but not loyalty, for saying the right words, but not for asking the right questions. You can hold them accountable for meeting budgets, but not for thinking entrepreneurially, meeting deadlines, but not working with passion. You can hold them accountable for results, but not for dreams, for competence, but not for caring, for their appearance, but not for taking pride in that appearance. You can hold people accountable for treating people with respect or not, but not for actually respecting people's dignity. You can make them salute, but you can't make them laugh. You can hold them accountable for what they say at work, on the job, but not for what they say at home or in the grocery store. You can hold people accountable for their job descriptions, but not for their life decisions. And there's some Bob Dent. Bob Dent is now the chief nursing officer for 3 hospitals at Emory Healthcare in Atlanta. And in our book, Building a Culture of Ownership in Healthcare, we describe 10 downsides of a culture focused on accountability. And these are the most important of those 10. Number 1, it is always perceived as punitive. You don't hold people accountable for doing great things. I'm going to hold you accountable by giving you a pay raise. It's always perceived as something negative. It sets a low bar for performance expectations. You can only hold people accountable for what they've been told to do, for what's in their job description, not for what they might do if they went above and beyond. It does not account for ambiguity, which we have so much of in healthcare. Your accountability is sort of a light switch. It's a yes or a no. It doesn't take into account lots of shades of gray, and it can establish perverse incentives, and it often does. There's a lot of research on that. Ownership is a much higher bar. Ownership is doing what needs to be done, not because you're going to be held accountable, but because you hold yourself to that higher standard. It is intrinsic motivation. And in a culture of ownership, everybody has the same job description. First and foremost, a caregiver. Last but not least, a janitor. And in between, whatever else needs to be done. And never saying these awful words, not my job, but instead, how can I help? And see here, when somebody is willing to walk across hot coals on their own because they're thinking like an owner, you don't need to hold their feet to the fire. And that is an incredible culture shift when you go from holding feet to the fire to having people walk across hot coals. And the imperative for us in healthcare to replace accountability with ownership has suddenly, tragically taken on a new urgency with the Vanderbilt case. At the AONL conference last week, talking with the chief nursing executive of a large healthcare system, and she said in the nursing school with which they are affiliated, the day this conviction was announced, they had 3 future nursing students who had been accepted, who were ready to come, call and withdraw by saying something like, you mean, not only can I lose my license, I can go to prison? And here's what I fear. If we continue to talk about accountability, as in holding people accountable in healthcare, we can undermine the work we've done to try to promote just culture. And so my question for you is, how can you, as EBP professionals, help us reinforce just culture in a world where In a world where the dangers of making a mistake have just gotten a whole lot more drastic and dire, and how can you help us assure caregivers that when we talk about accountability, we're not talking about punitive punishment, or we're going to have your back. We're going to honor just culture. We're going to honor learning from our mistakes and not punishing them unless they are intentional, which it does not appear was the case with the travesty at Vanderbilt. Courageous action number 5, help us transform data, evidence into stories. I love what Brené Brown says. She said, stories are data with a soul. Every month, I get a bracelet from the 4Ocean Company. I don't wear bracelets except for my self-empowerment pledge wristband. I give them away. Why do I get a bracelet every month? And I've been getting them for well over 2 years now, because I love what they do. They take ocean trash and turn it into things like bracelets. And they have pulled 20 million pounds of trash out of the ocean. And much of it has been turned into things like these bracelets. That's the evidence. But that's not really why I started and why every month after month, I continue to buy these bracelets. I don't have any feel for what 20 million pounds of trash is. So I try to put it into something I can understand. My little Ford pickup truck with Rocky the dog, 20 million pounds is about 3,500 F-150s. I can't even imagine that. What's a parking lot with 3,500 pickup trucks look like? That's not why I resonate so much with what they're doing at 4Ocean. It's the story of 4Ocean. These are the founders. The guys and they're co-CEOs now, the guys who started it. And here's their story. They were on a world surfing trip. They were in Bali. They couldn't even get in the water because there was so much plastic and trash floating around. And they went up to the lifeguard and they said, can't you guys do something about this? And the lifeguard said, we did this morning. This is what has accumulated since. Now, most of us would have maybe gone out and helped pick up the trash for the day. These guys said, this is a worldwide problem. There's so much garbage in the oceans. It's diminishing the earth. And they started this company, and it's become a booming success. The reason I put up with getting 3 or 4 emails a day promoting something they're doing, the reason I pay, I don't know, $25, $30 a month to get a bracelet I'm not going to wear is not because of the evidence, it's because of the story. And I'll tell you that when it comes to what's going on with COVID right now, we in healthcare have not done a good enough job of telling our story, whereas the people who are peddling disinformation about, COVID vaccines being dangerous, about ivermectin being, the greatest thing since sliced bread, they're doing a more effective job of telling a story, even if it's a story based on false evidence appearing real. We have to do better. How can you help us do better? How can you help us give our data, our evidence, a soul by making it tell stories that people resonate with? Courageous action number 6. How can you help us create a vision for a better future by merging evidence with imagination? See, evidence, by definition, evidence documents things that have already happened in the past. Evidence is backward looking. Imagination conjures up visions of things that might happen in the future, what might be evidence. And it's the tension between those two things, the evidence from the past that establishes what best practices are, with imaginings of the future that's the spark for creativity. I love the story of Steve Jobs when they started Apple. He was presented with a market research study that showed the worldwide demand for desktop computers was 50 personal computers. That was the evidence. And with his famous reality distortion zone, where he put this bubble of not accepting what there is today, not even asking what people want in the future because they don't know. He created, go run down the list, the Apple computer, the Mac, the iPhone, by not being chained to the evidence of the past, by imagining better evidence for the future, he was able to create that new future. Now, I'm not an expert in this field. Bern Melnick, who I'm sure many of you know, is. And I asked her about this. I asked her, is there any research on this marriage of the two things? And of course, if you know Bern, she sent me a 2-page bibliography. But in her email, and I asked her if I could quote her, because she said it so much more eloquently. When there isn't enough evidence to guide us, we have to innovate. But for an innovation to stick, we need evidence. And in the last 2 years, there has been incredible innovation. There have been workarounds. How do you, as evidence-based practice professionals, how can you help us document evidence for those innovations, for those workarounds, the ones that work, the ones that don't work, the ones we want to, as Bern said, the ones that we want to make stick? And finally, courageous action number 7. How can you help us use evidence to spark and fan an extravagant hope for a better future? Eric Hoffer, in his classic book, The True Believer, said he wrote about leaders and leaders who changed the world. And he said, anyone who would change the world or a corner of the world must have the ability to spark and fan an extravagant hope. And I am so concerned now about what I see as I look around healthcare, look around the world. And that is a fading of hope, a growing of despair. I've been in healthcare for more than 42 years, give or take. Every single year, since my very first job as a unit manager at a hospital in San Antonio, Texas, every single year, I've seen headlines about the healthcare crisis. This is the first time that I believe that term is actually warranted. And part of the crisis that I see, part of the reason I see so many people contemplating leaving healthcare and actually leaving healthcare is because they've lost hope. They've lost hope that we can make things better. How can we spark and fan an extravagant hope? And I want to share with you my vote for the dumbest thing that any leader, not healthcare, but any leader has said during the entire pandemic. This is the CEO who sent a message to every Uber employee saying, hope is not a strategy. Well, duh. We'll give you a dunce hat for being technically accurate. But without hope, even the most brilliant strategy is doomed to fail. Leadership job number 1 is promoting hope. See, there's a big difference between optimism and hope. Optimism requires evidence. If I tell you I'm optimistic that world peace is right around the corner, you could very legitimately say, well, on what is the basis for that opinion, that optimism? And in today's world, it would be very slim indeed. If I say, I hope world peace is right around the corner, I don't have to justify hope. There's no such thing as false hope. That is leadership job number 1, fostering an extravagant hope that whatever we're going through now, we're going to make it through. We're going to make it through better and stronger. We're not going to waste this crisis. And what you as evidence-based practice professionals can do is help us take off the rose-colored glasses, help us see things as they really are and not pretend to, not make them go away. And I think many of us are wearing rose-colored glasses when we look at things like the mental and emotional trauma that's been imposed. I'm very concerned that as the virus becomes endemic, that our attention is going to shift. We're going to move on to other things, and we're going to leave behind the emotional long haulers who are still going to be struggling with PTSD, with moral injury. How do you help us take off those rose-colored glasses, but replace them with rose-colored binoculars? No matter what we're going through now, no matter what the evidence is now, here's what the evidence can be in a year or 2 years or 5 years if we stay the course, if we keep doing what we're called to do. Let me wrap up with a story from a movie. If you saw the movie U-571, it's a movie in which during World War II, an American submarine has been tasked with capturing a German submarine so they can get the code breaking machine. And everything goes wrong. The American submarine blows up and sinks. The commander of the American sub is killed along with most of the crew. And you end up with a skeleton crew of Americans on a German submarine that they don't know how to operate, being led by this guy, Tyler, played by Matthew McConaughey, a junior skipper who's never been in command before in his life. And they're in the periscope room. And one of the young sailors looks at Tyler, the never before been a commander, and says, "What are we going to do now, skipper?" And Tyler says, "I don't know. You think I have all the answers? Well, I don't. I don't know." And he retreats back to the quarters of the German commander, which is now his quarters. And there's a knock on the door a couple minutes later. And Chief Clow, this old salt who's been in submarines since young Tyler was in diapers, comes in and says, "Sir, permission to speak." And Tyler says, "Yeah, Chief, what's on your mind?" And Tyler says, "Those words you said back there, I don't know. Don't you ever say that again. Those words, I don't know, will kill your men deader than a depth charge. You're the skipper now, and the skipper always knows. Even when he doesn't know, the skipper always knows. You're the skipper now. Today we need leaders in every corner. We need leadership in every corner, not just in the corner office. You're the skipper now. We need you as evidence-based professionals. We need you to help us answer the question, how can you help us know, even when we don't know? How can you help us sustain the hope? How can you help us tell the stories? How can you help us confront what's wrong, the misinformation that's killing so many people? How can you help us do a better job of navigating through these challenging times? You're the skipper now. How can you help us know even when we don't know? My favorite 3 words, it's the words of the book that I'm working on now. It will be out in July. Proceed until apprehended. That's the kind of spirit we need to have today. It doesn't mean be a loose cannon. It doesn't mean do your own thing, but it means if something needs to be done, you find a way to do it. If you can't do it yourself, you ask for help. It means replacing learned helplessness with a commitment to initiative. It means replacing complaining about problems with a commitment to take action to solve the problems. It means not talking about people behind their backs, because you never help someone be a better person doing that. It means having the courage to actually go talk to that person. Proceed until apprehended. Many nurse leaders have those words in their office now. And it's become a philosophy. It's a philosophy that should guide all of us. How can you help us know, even when we don't know?